Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to a new session here on the Shift Network Sound Healing Summit. We appreciate having you with us once again. Our special guest coming up this time is Stephen Halpern. Stephen Halpern, PhD, is a Grammy Award nominated multi-platinum selling recording artist, composer, researcher, musician, author, pioneering sound healer, and founding father of New Age music. His groundbreaking biofeedback research from 1973 helped establish the scientific basis of sound and music's effect on the human biofield and our subtle energy anatomy via his classic album, Chakra Suite. Stephen, welcome.
Well, thank you, Alex. Great to be here, and hello, everybody.
Always an honor to have you here. And as we just noted in that intro, you began this work as a music creator and researcher back in the mid-70s, 1973.
Well, actually, my interest in sound healing began while I was in high school when I read an article about Edgar Cayce and his readings talking about the healing temples in ancient Egypt using sound and music. So I was already getting hooked, and in college, I read the book by Carl Jung on mandalas, and at the end, there was on the last chapter, there was an image of somatic imagery. The first time I had ever seen the work of Dr. Hans Jenny. So I was already looking for that information, and the books that I would find talked about the ancient tradition of sound healing, but you can never hear any actual music. There were no recordings from ancient Greece or ancient China. And as a student of the 60s, part of my quest was to learn what sound healing, not in ancient Greece sounded like, but what it would sound like in our culture today. And at that point, there were no books specifically speaking certainly about the physical effects of music on consciousness. There were books from the music therapy world that talked about the effects of rhythm on the heart, or whether certain music made you happy or sad. But in terms of spiritual and energetic healing, no one had ever really looked at that, including me. And in 1969, I had no idea that when I came out to California for 2 weeks, my life would change. I'd be invited to be on staff at the sister organization of the famous Esalen Institute. And that 3 weeks into being on the staff there and giving up my graduate fellowship in Buffalo, where I was going to study all this, I'm playing for all the teachers who would teach on the weekends leading the seminars. And Dr. Stanley Krippner and Dr. John Lilly in successive weekends said, your music seems to be very relaxing. We see the subjective, responses of people. If you want to be taken seriously in the scientific world, you need to do biofeedback research. Now, I had just left a graduate program that I was getting paid to be in a fellowship, and I had exclaimed to everybody, you'll never catch me back in graduate school again. But Dr. Krippner said, we have the best biofeedback equipment on the West Coast outside of UCLA. And if you apply to our new program, I'll guarantee that you get in and you could use the equipment for free. So that was the beginning of how I got back into the world of science and consciousness, because I was already reading about quantum physics and, of course, music and spirituality. But searching for other information, there wasn't an internet back then. And so that became the focus of my graduate research, never dreaming that I was going to have a career talking about this and teaching people what I found out from my research in reading all the books and connecting directly with quantum physicists and quantum biologists, psychics, and other great authors and researchers like Andrei Puharich and Itzhak Bentov, that really put me in a position where I had more of a focused body of information than anybody else. So what do you do with it? You have to write a book. You have to tell people about it when you find something that's good. And for a number of years, I was the only one out there traveling around the country, flying a different city every weekend, doing workshops and concerts and spreading the gospel of the healing powers of sound and music.
Oh, and yes, your early books, Sound, Health, and Tuning the Human Instrument, a couple of that, as far as I'm aware, were a couple of the earliest books that really laid it out there, the therapeutic, transformative effects of sound and music.
Right. We look at this cover now. This was my 4th edition of the cover. I was so underfunded. I came back. Well, I got turned on to cymatics at the first Festival of Mind, Body, Spirit in London in April 1977. And that's where I was introduced to the work of Hans Jenny and the cymatics videos, which at that point were very, very secret and hush hush. But I came back to America and I said, I now have a way when I'm on a radio show or TV show or being interviewed from the press, I could show them sound evidence that sound could literally move molecules of sand and water and air and smoke. And I said, how do you get this information out there? And my consultant said, write a book. And my first copy of this book in 1977 had a 1-color, like Kinko's quick print, cheapo cover. And that was the first book that I self-published, didn't have an editor, didn't know what I was doing, but I got it out there and it still impacted a lot of lives because the information was the first time anyone had seen some of them. And over the years, I was able to improve the cover graphics, etc. But when I was working on my second book, I got a call from Halpern, and they said, we want somebody to write a book on sound healing and sound health. And everyone says, we need to talk to you. So I said, okay, I'll give you my book. Didn't have an agent, big mistake. But anyway, that got the book out there into a wider audience with Halpern. And that was a lot of work, but it really helped get a basis of information out there in a way that had really never been out there before.
They're currently out of print, but highly recommended if you can scour around and find used copies.
Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're $100 and sometimes they're $10. And when I search online, if I found one for $10, I buy it.
I got mine for $9 Canadian. I bought it in Vancouver.
Right.
But any plans to reprint these books? Because that would be highly valuable, I think.
Well, I had plans for many years, but in the format they are, other people have used a lot of the information and done a good job of editing it. So my next book is going to be more personal and more of a memoir and stories about how some of the mystical experiences figured into the recording of some of the albums and how, while I was recording some of my albums, mystical experiences happened and tie in some of the science behind that. But a lot of the information that I had is already out there online in the internet, and people can search it for themselves. And at some point, I'll put some of the book back up there. But right now, there are enough other books. You have a book out there. Jonathan has a book out there. There are enough other books that cover similar territory. I had the original references, so I know where a lot of the material came from. It's out there, and the more people that learn about how important and how powerful sound is, the better. Meanwhile, what also happened when I first started going around the country, there was a move in Congress to outlaw color healing and sound healing and hypnotherapy and vitamin and mineral supplements. And at that point, the FDA was calmed down and the Congress was calmed down. But for many years, you could still get in trouble. In fact, from that point to 1993, for even talking about sound healing. And I know, because I was in some of those meetings, I was invited with the FDA agent and the National Health Federation lawyers, and I learned some pretty amazing things from people that we don't usually associate it with, who were scared of sound healing. And you know why? Because it works. And the pharmaceutical industry, actually, I met one of the people who came up to me after one of my workshops and said, we don't like that you're saying that your music could reduce stress and reduce stress headaches, because we see that as an economic threat. And I say, you guys sell 1 billion aspirin a year. I sell 5,000 LPs. That's how long ago it was. Why are you worried? I said, we know what could happen, that it could spread. This information could spread, and people can begin taking responsibility for their own health. I said, well, that's how I approach life. I want to, empower my own healing ability. And what's really nice in terms of the state of of knowledge now is recent books by Deepak Chopra and Dr. Bruce Lipton talk about the reasons and the scientific evidence that proves all the things I was talking about in my early books in terms of how we could literally use sound to balance the energy fields of the body, how we can use sound and music, specially composed sound and music, the right kinds of sound and music, to get into the state of consciousness where our brain waves are balanced, where our own internal healing energies are more powerfully marshaled and amplified. And in that state, we can instruct, and this is the new part that Bruce Lipton brought out about 15 years ago, the biology of belief, that we can literally instruct our genes and our DNA to express for optimal health. We could go beyond just the sound, but using the sound as a way to harness our own mental energies, our mind field, to influence ourselves. I mean, what a concept. We never knew about that when we were growing up. No one knew about it. But also, in so doing, we can bring in a whole new ability to support our own well-being by having music that helps us balance the hemispheres of our brain. Brain balancing, shifting into a higher state of coherence is a very good thing to do. The scientists that I hired to do my research in 1973 is what really introduced me to the whole world of subtle energies. And I was seeing studies done at Harvard and Princeton and Yale in 1910 or something, where they were talking about energetic fields, life fields, and then all that information got suppressed. So I didn't invent a lot of these things, but I just helped rediscover it and publicize it. In the same way that I didn't invent a relationship between the colors of the rainbow and the seven colors of the rainbow and the 7 chakras. But I was the first person to put a soundtrack to that. And that became my Chakra Suite album. Originally came out as Spectrum Suite, and then for a brief moment before that came out as Christening for Listening, meaning this is a new way to listen to music that'll balance your brain waves. People didn't know what brain waves were in 1973 and 75 when my first album came out. And as late as 1991, when I was working with John Bradshaw at his conferences, people would often ask, when I would give a 5-minute talk about brainwaves and brainwave entrainment, they would say, what's a brainwave? Do I have one? And I found that shocking, but then I realized a lot of people don't, because you don't get taught that in school. And if you're not at a sound healing panel and a conference, you may never even heard about that. So let me take a second to fill in a little background on part of the basis of sound healing. There's the physical basis of cymatics, which we'll talk about, and the frequency basis in terms of the electrical fluctuations and vibrations of your brain as an electrical apparatus fluctuates at various cycles per second. Alpha waves were named alpha because they're the first brain waves to be measured at about 8 to 12 cycles per second in about 1920 or so. And that helped people begin to measure the electrical activity of the brain. Then beta, which is normal waking consciousness, from 13 to 30 cycles per second. We move down to theta, between 4 and 7 cycles per second, so it's slower, and that's where you get into deeper meditation and deeper access to healing frequencies. When your brain is balanced and in that frequency, your healing thoughts are more effective. And putting you to sleep in the delta between 1 and 3 cycles per second. These frequencies were measured, but information did get out to people. And the concept then of not just measuring them, but what happens when you balance most hemispheres of the brain. Let me take you through a quick little demonstration of how I could unbalance your brain, everybody out there. If you're not driving, and I hope you're not at this point, I will demonstrate a little phrase that we all know and love from our experience and exposure to music in the Western Hemisphere. Watch what happens as I continue the pattern of these ascending frequencies. So it's do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. And how many of you are holding your breath right now, waiting for that final note, the do, to be said? How many of you could feel the tightness in your chest? Well, many people are holding their breath, waiting for the other musical shoe to drop. We've been culturally conditioned to expect, to predict where the music is going. That is a function of our left brain, the analytical mode. The left brain lights up, the right brain, the right hemisphere, which deals more with tone and field effects, is damped down. That is unbalanced. It's great for a lot of things. Guess what? Most classical music is left brain dominant. What I discovered with my own music from the research is that part of the reason people had such relaxing and meditative experiences with the music is because almost instantaneously, the music would put you in a balanced, high coherence, alpha state. And then if you use the music as a meditative source, it would bring you down into the theta state. And part of the reason for that is also that when I am recording, I am in that state myself. And as many musicians know, music is a carrier wave for consciousness. So that the state of consciousness that I am in when I am recording is also recorded. It may not show up on a VU meter or a certain frequency counter or an oscilloscope, but it's there on another dimension, another frequency octave, and it's very, very significant. And that became part of my understanding and responsibility that when I record, I need to be in a balanced state, or even if I play the right notes, it'll have not the desired energetic balancing effect. And that's been part of my principle since day one, and continues to be at this point. So we've done a little bit of, so the other part about brainwave entrainment is not only do we identify the frequency ranges, but if you can feel your pulse or your heartbeat right now, a very simple technique to alter your physiology. I am in control of your heartbeat right now. I will begin to tap my hand, and as I speed it up, your pulse is going to speed up. Your heartbeat is speeding up because the heart responds to an external rhythm. This is called rhythm entrainment on the of the beats per minute aspect. And I'll slow it down to where we were. And this is why you find these kind of soundtracks subtly in many movies and TV programs now. When I hooked up my Bose surround sound system the first time 10 years ago, and I could hear the bass notes that I never heard from just my TV screen, it's amazing how we are being subliminally affected by the rhythms and the low frequencies of many programs. Even worse now are the ads. Volvo, the car manufacturer, one of the worst right now. I was listening to Good Morning America. Let me give them a plug. I had to turn it off. They have disco, drum and bass, or just drum behind all, the 10 minutes that I watched as part of the soundtrack. It was so disconcerting, but it was so, I was actually having a difficult time breathing, because if the entrainment, and here's another basic principle, if the entrainment of what you're listening to is not what your heart wants to beat at, not at that rhythm, it will create stress. This was a major part of my early presentations, understanding how the environment will stress us out in the acoustic domain. My music was always an antithesis to that. My first marketing slogan was the anti-frantic alternative. To this day, sometimes when I would, when I was still flying at the airport, people would say, "Hey, Mr. Anti-Frantic." That's what they knew me. They didn't know my name. They knew, anti-frantic. And then because anti is a kind of a negative word, I shifted and changed the technology of describing it. But the reality is, as our heartbeats are being trained by things around our office, at home, out in the world, if you choose it consciously, you are doing a lot more to help your body stay in tune and using the positive aspects of sound health.
Mr. Anti-Frantic, I love it. Sounds like an old Freak Brothers comic character.
Yeah.
Bless it. But before we go on talking more,
Yes,
and we will talk about maybe some more specifics that benefits people can get listening from this. But actually, rather than talk about the music, let's just hear a little sound sample.
exactly.
Because we have some choices.
Let's start off with a little bit of deep alpha, because, and we'll take about 45 seconds or a minute of that. When you listen, there's nowhere else you need to go. You just melt into the music and go with the flow. Don't try to analyze it, just be with the music. It automatically encourages a mindful state of being present moment awareness.
Okay, take it away.
Great. So that's the music format that I began with. Over the years, I've expanded that to have some more musical variety and interest. But the essential basis is that lack of predictability, the lack of a central pulse, because I don't want to entrain your heartbeat. I want your body to choose the heartbeat rhythm that's most powerful and beneficial for you. And your body will do that if it's not being coerced and manipulated by an external rhythmic stimulus. Now, the next one I'd like to listen to would be deep alpha, because as we listen to that, there's an extra feature that will guarantee that your brainwaves shift into a high coherence balanced state. And as the music begins to get softer behind us, I'll mention that the wonderful oboe player is Paul McCandless, who improvised that incredible melody on top of the pre-produced orchestration I had. And then I added brainwave entrainment at 8 cycles per second to get you entrained to the dominant frequency of the earth itself. It's a real good thing to be in tune with the dominant frequency of the earth. That's the Schumann resonance, the earth resonance. And when we listen to this next piece, Deep Theta, again, going back to the pure Rhodes, that's Rhodes electric piano. Originally it came out as a Fender Rhodes electric piano, but then Harold got his rights back and became Harold Rhodes electric piano. This was an instrument I first heard in a life-changing meditation before it was out in public. And I said, wow, what an amazing sound. So the sound itself of the instrument, which is essentially like a series of tuning forks played as a keyboard, that gave me ability to shift over from being a trumpet player and a guitar player to playing a keyboard, but using the sounds that would instantly get me into an altered state without any kind of vegetable addition and ingestion. Just naturally the sound would shift my energy patterns. And in the research, we found that it did that to a lot of other people as well. So here's Deep Theta, which will get you down into the lower frequencies, high coherence brain states. As you listen, this might be a good time to say mentally an affirmation for your own healing. Could be as simple as, perfect health is my birthright, or I enjoy optimal health. It could be as simple as that. Your subconscious is not impressed by complexity. So, or you could just listen. Either way, here we go. And as we begin to come out of the music, allow yourself to take a deep breath, come back fully into the body, relaxed and refreshed and ready to listen to a little more of this very interesting conversation we're having. One of the things, Alec, I remember from the last two times we did a sound healing panel is that one of the wonderful things about you is that you set such a wonderful energetic field. I remember commenting about this before because I do a lot of podcasts and the energy speaking with you is different and more coherent. So thank you for being part of this. And I was noticing that as you're listening to the music, I go, I need to mention this. So thank you. Now, before, I know we're getting close to the end, I want to say something else about the field of sound healing. For many people, sound healing, particularly if you're new to the field, means someone playing Tibetan bowls or crystal bowls or using sound healing instruments like tuning forks. And I was teaching about those and demonstrating those back in the 70s. As a musician, I've recorded all of those also, but I noticed that after a few minutes, I will get bored listening to tuning forks or bowls or some of the other things. I need a little more musical variety, but not enough music that it takes me out of the zone. And when I'm in the studio, that's the focus that I work with. But I also started using and creating my own matrix that I can dial in the brainwave frequencies that I want to be in and add that to the music. So I started doing that in 1980, but didn't talk about it publicly. Very few other people other than Robert Monroe were dealing with that in the early days. Master Charles Cannon started working with that in the mid 80s, and I worked with him. But it was only after the internet got going, that people started hearing about brainwave entrainment and all these frequencies. And yet, if you go to some of these sites online and say, well, let me listen to alpha brainwave frequencies, what you will hear, folks, is bum, 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 bum. And to me, that is not conducive to meditation or healing or anything like that. We call that stomach pump music, or lumberjack music. There are ways to make that much more subtle, and that's part of what, as a musician, I bring into the music. But it's particularly because I've had experiences as I'm recording that sometimes opened up a whole new portal of creative expression. And if you're new to the field of sound healing, you want to also be looking for and on the lookout and monitoring your own responses when there is music that combines elements of sound healing with a higher dimension of creativity. Energy, creative energy has a healing aspect of its own. And there's a song that I think we have queued up from Ancient Echoes, which was an album I recorded with Georgia Kelly in 1978, where something happened that blew my mind, blew George's mind, freaked out the engineer, and started me on a quest to understand more about the power of sound and vocal sound and mantra. So right now, let's listen to Ancient Echoes, the title song, because this chant spontaneously started coming out of my mouth at the end of the recording session. And then we were lucky enough to still be in the room and got it on tape. Music begins to fade on out. I didn't give you any setup with any programmed visualization stuff, but many people, I could tell you, have had past life memories awake from this music. Brian Weiss has used this music in many of his workshops, also used the music of Higher Ground. And for me, it opened up an opportunity that 2 years later, when I got to be inside the Great Pyramid, when I did that chant, working with the sacred energies of the 5 vowel sounds, the room filled with light, the king's chamber filled with light, and I almost levitated. And I go, when I was chanting that the first time in the studio, for one of the very few times in my life, I had visions as I was playing. Usually I close my eyes as I'm recording and I don't see anything. It's just dark and I'm in the void. I'm in the space between the notes. That time I had the full cinema, 3-dimensional procession of white robed priests. And Georgia and I debated even including that on the album because it was so different from the album. But there was such a powerful healing and creative energy that we said, we've got to have it on the album. And I've just reissued the 44th anniversary deluxe edition of that aspect, which combines the healing powers of harp and keyboards and the creative energy that was coming through as we were in the moment with the music.
Yeah, so what I heard, there was a flow of vowel sounds that sort of sound like E-I-O, which among other things I've heard of is an ancient Gnostic name for God. But I understand you had a really interesting experience after that, where you were approached by a member of the Rosicrucian Society about that sound.
Right. So back in the days on cassettes and LPs, there wasn't a lot of room to write about things, but I would mention, and I play the music in my workshop. Sometimes I tell that story, but very rarely. But then one day, a person comes up and says, "Who gave you permission to use our sacred chant?" And I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, I'm a, official of the Rosicrucian order, and you don't have permission. You're not one of us, and you don't have permission to use that publicly. And I said, well, let me tell you how it happened and how it happened to be recorded. And after I told him the story, he said, well, in that case, how would you like to perform at our next national conference? So I got to perform that at a national conference for the Rosicrucians, and we were all fine with that. So I have no idea how that happened, but the harp, of course, is an ancient instrument, not necessarily the concert harp that Georgia plays, but that energy field that the album cover itself acknowledged the quote from Hazrat Inayat Khan, one of the great Sufi mystics, talking about the healing powers of sound and the power of music to bring us close to God, as opposed to a distraction to take us away from God. So that was on the album jacket way back in 1978. And I actually had some stores and distributors say, we'd like it if you didn't include that testimonial from Hazrat Inayat Khan on your album. It might upset some people. I go, well, now 40 years later, it would probably be illegal again. But, his books are getting burned. But the ancients knew about the power of sound. And there were books on the 5 sacred vowel sounds, the A, E, I, O, U sound, that are in many of the cultures around the world. So even though I had not studied that at that point, it came through me. And then I said, well, I better start paying attention to this and find out what's going on. So that was part of how I get guided to explore different areas in my own journey.
I just think that's just a trippy story and great, interesting validation that you tapped into something independently of the Rosicrucian teachings. You're just really
right.
But keep going with that theme about what the ancients knew about sounds. I'm of the belief that they had very profound knowledge of resonance and harmonic principles. Would you like to say a little bit more about that and any evidence that's been found for that?
Many of you are familiar with the show on the History Channel called Ancient Aliens. They had a program a couple of years ago on ancient frequencies and sacred frequencies inside ancient caves and buildings and caverns that were tuned to particular frequencies. And on the show, so it's obvious, and some of the temples that, and also the Great Pyramid, that these rooms were tuned to particular frequencies. When you go inside the Great Pyramid, and as many of us were taught to do, you hit the side of the king's coffer, the sarcophagus, it makes an A note of 438 hertz. And that's physical. But when different people are in there, it could maybe create different frequencies just with the voice. When I went in there, my voice resonated at A438. Other people say, no, the room resonates at 432 cycles per second. But that's a special part of that. But in Malta, there are rooms that on the TV show, they said, this room was tuned to 110 hertz frequency. And part of the reason the rooms were tuned to low frequencies, because only the men could chant that lower note and the women could not. So the men got to be the priests. But when I spoke to Freddie Silver and some other people who've researched those things, they found other places were not at 110, even though the people on that TV show said all the places are 110 hertz. So who's right? I haven't been to all the places, so I don't know. But I do know that who is doing the investigating can have an effect on the frequencies that they will measure, which is, on a level of quantum physics. So that's real interesting. But we know so much about the power of sound. And of course, you go back, Joshua's Battle of Jericho, playing all those trumpets and all those horns, playing at the fundamental frequency of the walls of Jericho and disassociating the molecules and causing the walls to fall down. That was the ancient use of non-sound healing. But, going back to the biblical David soothing Saul, or going back to Pythagoras healing people of mental afflictions by playing a certain mode or scale on the harp. When I read that, I go, okay, what scale? What harp? But also remember that in 2000 BC or 500 BC, there was no iPods, there was no radio frequencies, there was no music that you would hear outside of the temple or going to war, military music. So anybody that might hear a scale or a certain mode might have a much more acute reaction than nowadays when we are surrounded all the time by sound and music. And then we kind of get blasé and ignore it, but we do so at our peril, whether for bad or for good. We can make so much more positive use of sound and healing in our lives that that's certainly been part of our mission, to remind people to take advantage of that, listen to all the different speakers at this summit, and begin to bring these aspects into your life. Some are do-it-yourself and some are passive, where you could just listen to the music, and some you obviously can participate. So that's been part of my message, and it's part of my message today as well.
Yeah, your mission. What was your phrase we talked about last time? The ministry of sound, sacred sound. What was your phrase?
Ministry of sacred sound. In the meditation that changed my life, shortly after I got to California, 2 days before I was supposed to fly back to New York, back to graduate school, I was guided to a redwood meditation area, and was basically sat down and had a very out-of-body meditation where I started hearing the music, and basically was told, you've been praying to hear the new healing music for the 20th century. Now you've heard it. Your job is getting it out to the public. You need to tell the people about this. And this is, you can consider this your initiation into the ministry of healing music. And I had no idea what that would mean at the end of November 1969. I was a jazz rock trumpet player and guitar player. I wasn't really playing keyboards. What am I supposed to do with this meditational insight? And then guidance would come, and I would meet people who would carry me along on the path, connect me to someone else. And it's been quite a ride.
Thank you for sharing the ministry of sacred sound, because it's an endless journey and endless new plateaus and new niches to discover. So
right.
Happy to be here. Well, happy to have you here, and happy to have this whole summit here sharing all these things. And I like what you just noted, that delineation, those two big categories: the passive, receptive listening, silence, being in stillness, still point, and then the active generation of sound through voice.
Right. And I'm sure you have other people that are dealing with drums. I was the first drum circle person in Palo Alto. I even got a gig teaching in the Palo Alto school system, teaching drum circles. And you know who was the toughest people to work with? The music teachers. They couldn't keep a beat at all. I wish I had video, but it's so easy to begin to play some rhythms and to join people playing drums in other parts. So make some sound, make some healing sounds, do some good rhythms, keep some more music in your life.
Oh, because that's really the real deal. Just get in the experience of it and make it your own. Many approaches, but to keep on our topic here with Stephen's music, just seek out some of those albums. But Chakra Suite is an essential classic in the field of sound healing music, new age music, various other labels you could put on it. But just get hold of it. And the brainwave entrainment recordings, you can listen to those and pick them strategically to key yourself into those brainwave states you want to work with. Would you agree that's a good approach?
Absolutely. And as a card carrying, what we used to call as type A individuals, but now I look at myself as an undiagnosed adult, high functioning ADHD or ADD person. So when I want to relax, I don't want to wait 20 minutes. I've always been that way. I want to get relaxed in one moment. When I have a couple minutes to meditate, I don't want to take 20 minutes to get into a meditative state. I want to listen and be there within seconds. So that's why I recorded and produced some of the recordings that I have now shared with the public. I did them first for me. I want to get in the zone right away and then spend the time in the zone rather than getting there. And so by some definition, that's ADD. I go, it works for me. And I wouldn't have been able to record 100 different albums if I just wasn't able to get into that state that quickly in the studio as well as out of the studio.
Yeah, well, we only have a few minutes left, but since you just touched on that topic, because your output is prolific, but any particular like sort of hacks or tips you might suggest for someone who can help get into that sort of creative?
Sure. Well, for me, because the theta state is well known to be the state that people in when they get into heightened creativity. And I was teaching this back in the early 1980s. I worked with Jeannie Laborde, who was a NLP teacher. And at some of these seminars, we had people from Coca-Cola, IBM, probably some of the government initial agencies, AT&T. And I took them into the state, and they went deeper than my new age audiences. So when you're a high level creative or functioning person, you're already able to focus your brain in these positive frequencies. So when I'm writing a new article or working on a piece of music, I may tune my brain by listening to even 1 minute of my own music that will orchestrate my consciousness so that when I begin to move my fingers, I'm already in the zone. And what I notice is that my hearing expands. I hear deeper into the spaces between the notes. I get into that mindful space, literally the gap between thoughts that Deepak Chopra and Wayne Dyer was speaking about. I was talking about that 30 years ago in musical terms. And that's what keeps recording for me so fresh, because I never know exactly what's going to happen, but I have to be in the moment. I can't remember what I just did, and I don't know, but then my fingers, and I listen to some of the overtones and the echoes, and I hear melodies inside there, and then I play them. So it's, I have a band that I work with, but most of you can't see them. And that's been part of the secret of my my production, but also, of course, making an appointment with the recording studio, affirming that I will play from a place of peace, that the music that comes through is of the highest and best for the audience who's going to listen to them. And that's part of my recording philosophy. And after I had been working with that for a number of years, I found that Edgar Cayce had used almost the same words in a reading that he gave in 1940 in one of his many transcribed readings. So at some level, I was tuned in to that musician's prayer, and that's always just been a part of my process. And if I'm not composing, just meditating at home, again, I want to be in the zone right away, like the old MTV thing. I want my MTV and I want it now. I want my relaxation. I want it now. I want my healing and I want it now. And can't go wrong with that.
Yeah, I dig it. Because think of the metaphor of, well, changing a radio station. Some people still have those, I hear.
Oh, yeah.
When you go click one to the other, it's like instant. It's not like an hour worth of processing craziness. Shifting frequencies can be gracefully instantaneous, I think.
When I first was bringing my music out to the public, of course, I went to the Music Therapy Association. And in the first meeting I was at, I was told, don't be ridiculous. We all know that it takes an hour to shift from being stressed into relaxation. There's no music that could do that quicker than that. And I said, there is now. And I had my research, my brainwave research. I showed, and they showed the GSR, the galvanic skin response, and the EEGs and the curling photography. I said, there is now. He said, yes, but it's not classical music. And I said, yes, and that's why it works better for relaxation and healing than most classical music. I was asked to leave. But then years later, they invited me to give keynote speeches at the Music Therapy Association, at least for a couple years.
I love it. That's almost like a Yoda-like statement.
Right.
There is now. But so on that note, in our last couple minutes here, if people would like to hear more of your music and read some more of your essays, where's the best place to go?
Certainly my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Stephen Halpern Music. My website has a lot of my articles, and we'll have more. That is stephenhalpernmusic.com. And those are the two main places where my material is still out there. And if you have questions, you could write me, you could tweet, you'll find all that information on the website, and you could listen. And you'll even see my little demonstration of the scaleless interruptus, where I sang the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la. A scaleless interruptus, another phrase that just popped into my head one day, being the inherent stressful nature of Western composition, melodic phrasing and predictability. Great for many things, not so great for relaxation, not so great for healing, because you're paying attention to the music rather than your own energetic realities.
Thank you for that one. And unfortunately, we don't have time to go deeper into that now, but just refer people to your website and books if you can find them. Because there's a lot of people doing sound bath work, type work, gong baths that I think can really benefit from these concepts of that you sketched out earlier, that music that doesn't play with your expectations. And
right, and that's why sound baths are so good. Crystal bowls, they don't go anywhere. They're just right there. And that's the beauty of them. Particularly when you get some of the better ones, you play certain ones together. But yeah, that's the point. And that's why they are ancient instruments, have been around for thousands of years, in Tibet, in ancient China, in Egypt. And now today, we could use them ourselves. And if you buy your own, you could do it for yourself at home.
Yeah, they're there, and even easier and more immediate. You can find your way to some of Steven's music on his website, or it's also streaming everywhere now.
All the streaming platforms. And hey, Alexa, play some Halpern. People say, that's how we listen to you. We don't buy CDs. We just, hey, Alexa, play some Halpern. But you want to, they have a million songs on there. You want to get some of the best, and you can find some of those suggestions on my website.
Right on. And just know you can go there, enjoy, listen, just be in the experience, but also use them as, practical, active tools. When you
absolutely
get into that theta state, you can start to self-program with intentions and affirmations. So it's all up there to enjoy. So yeah. So once again, Stephen, thank you for joining us here today and sharing.
Well, I enjoyed this too. We covered a lot today. So I look forward to listening back and see what we covered.
Yeah, you were on a great roll, so just try to let you go as much as possible. So we got some good music clips in, so it'll let the music do the talking. As you said earlier, a sound says 1,001 words. So that's the end of our speaking part here today. So we'll draw the curtain here on this particular journey on the sound current. So once again, Stephen, thank you. Thank you to the Shift Network. And
yes,
thank you for everyone out there listening, because your energy and attention and presence is what really makes this come to life. So thank you for being there, and come on back. We'll see you on the next session here on the Shift Network Sound Healing Summit.